No, I just got a question uh,
Yes.
about graduation. So do you like have it pulled up on your laptop and you take it up there?
Yes. Yep. You bring your laptop up to the presentation and you present from your laptop. And
Oh,
you can either be running it locally on your laptop, or as Nathan is encouraging, to have it deployed and be running it from the website.
okay.
But either is acceptable.
All righty. And that our graduation is the
Yeah,
same.
and I think that
Our graduation is the same day that I have open house at work. So
is that tricky time wise? Are you going to be able to
yes,
make it?
well, I work right at HW, so it's not too bad. It's like right down the road, but like per my contract, I gotta like stay a little bit. So yeah, I can't be docked. So I'm gonna have to stay a little bit, but I'm gonna be there. I think they're not gonna start like really doing stuff till like 6:15. So I'm gonna
Yeah.
come in like right at that time.
Oh, you should be fine then.
Okay, yeah, I'll be right at that time. I start at 5:30, so I feel like if I give them a good like 40 minutes, that'll cover me.
And maybe you can ask to go later in the lineup
Yeah,
just in case.
yes.
Has anyone else heard anything about the status of tonight's class? Nathan says he is not teaching tonight. So I kind of assumed that meant Max would show up and teach something.
Well, you know what? I could use a good break after yesterday.
Well, that might be the case.
Sequoia, I don't know how you did it, girl. I don't know how you did it. You got everything done before your actual job started. Like the day before, everything was done. That was amazing.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Howdy.
Yesterday just took it down in shambles for me.
Hello, Max.
Yesterday.
Did you guys miss me?
You know what, Max? I really did. Welcome back, Max.
How did deploys go? Is it what you were expecting?
Surprisingly well, because I thought I broke it just before then. So I had a knot in my throat, ready to cry, and he was like, fixed.
You will find that at the end of the program, more and more one-on-ones are like that, where it's like, just a couple little problems and we work our way through them pretty quickly. And that's what debugging is, right? That is, even in the workplace, you'll go to your mentor and you're like, I'm a terrible developer. I'll never make it. And it's like, oh, you forgot a comma. You're fine. So and that's okay. I think it's important to remember, like, don't just plow through it. Don't just keep working on something else, because the more you go past that error and go, oh, I'll fix that eventually, the more dangerous it becomes, because you don't know if the next thing that you're working on is actually working or not. So it's very tempting to be like, oh, I'm just going to keep working on it. I'll fix that bug eventually. But definitely, as errors come up, listen to the errors, kind of lean into them a little bit. And then also remember that when you get a different error message, that means you're making progress, right? And that can be really hard because you're getting error message after error message after error message. But there is such a thing where that error, you will run out of error messages and all of a sudden it will be working again, right? So keep working with them. Persistence is definitely very important. But that is what development is, right? And I think the other important tip is to remember to like take a step back sometimes, and say, all right, what am I trying to accomplish right now? Because all I'm getting is a gazillion error messages. And it's not enough to say, oh, I'm just trying to get this working, right? And it's very tempting to say that, What are you trying to get working? What have you debugged? Have you made sure the front end is working? If not, that's where you start. If the front end is working, have you checked the back end? Are there any errors in the terminal back there? Great. If you've done that, did you go to the database? Is the database up and running, right? You really, sometimes it's helpful when you're getting all of those error messages to take a step back and just be like, okay, what am I trying to accomplish? If I can't say that in a sentence, I kind of need to take a step back and stop looking at the trees in the forest and look at the entire forest overall and say, okay, do I understand that one thing that I'm trying to get working right now? Because so many times you start falling down a rabbit hole, and you don't stop falling down rabbit holes as a senior developer. You just get better at knowing what rabbit holes you've already gone down and know how to avoid them. So it is, Natasha asked me a question on the way back from the Luma Festival of like, how long have you been stuck on a problem? And the answer overall has been like 2 or 3 weeks, but I never let those 3 weeks be all at once, right? I've worked on that problem. I've gotten stuck. I've had a headache from banging my head against the keyboard so much. And then you get to that point, you're like, I got to take a step away from this, right? I got to work on a different feature, or I've got to ask for help. Or sometimes you just have to take a step back and rubber duck it, right? And say, all right, what am I trying to work on? What have I tried? Sometimes writing yourself out like a little outline or an essay of like, here's what I've tried, here's what's worked, here's what hasn't worked. And sometimes even going to a fellow student and being like, this is the error message I'm getting. I don't know what it means. Do you have any ideas, right? Talking to someone else, getting out of your own head, can really help you kind of outsmart that error message and really think through what's going on with it. And even if that doesn't work, you've got one-on-ones, right? This is your time left in the program. Utilize those one-on-ones, because your capstone is what you're going to invest into it. And it can be so that imposter syndrome can flare up so much when all you're getting is those error messages, right? So lean into those one-on-ones, because it may be a 3-minute one-on-one that clears that problem. And then you get to use the rest of the time in that one-on-one to ask about where you should be headed next, how you should be thinking about features, all of that kind of stuff. So what's the time that's left in the program is up to you guys to utilize, because after the program, you're not going to have unlimited access to one-on-ones. You're not going to have that senior developer who is there to mentor you and all of that stuff. So think about how to best utilize your time and really take advantage of that over the next 3 weeks, because we are in week 20. We are officially in week 22, which means you have 2 weeks and 2 days until graduation. So definitely something to think about. Does anyone have any questions about any of that stuff?
I just like from last night, I'm still trying to understand how we're using, like, we were taught clerk, right? But now, like, when I got ready to deploy, clerk was the issue for mine.
Yeah.
The number one-on-one, but I mean, it's not clear. And I know other people probably have the same thing who use clerk. It's not clear to me why, like, now all of a sudden I have to either add something or remove it altogether for it to work.
Yeah. So let me clear that up a little bit. So we made 2 changes, and making 2 changes at the same time without testing either one of them first, probably not the best idea, right? So we were using a authentication system last cohort called Express Session, and it basically used cookies, but it was a kind of considered an old school way of doing authentication. And so Ryan had mentioned at the end of his module that he would love to come back and teach authentication in a simpler way. And so I said, great, let's go for it. He taught Clerk. You guys got Clerk running locally. Everything was fantastic. Well, Nathan came back and said, hey, I've been checking out how I do deploys on AWS, and AWS is just so many little steps because AWS is set up for applications that are deploying to tens or hundreds or millions of users, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of users, and AWS isn't really set up for smaller scale deploys. It's not set up for your MVPs. And the other problem with AWS is their pricing isn't really explicit. So they give you this calculator that you can punch things into, but they don't really tell you how much it's going to cost until the end of the month. So imagine going to the grocery store and them saying, well, we're not going to tell you how much all of your items cost until after you check out. And as you're walking out the door, then we're going to tell you what the bill is. Well, AWS pricing is so complicated that you can kind of estimate how much it's going to cost, but you don't really know until you get the bill at the end of the month, and then at that point, it's too late, right? They charge you for it, and so when you're working on a smaller budget, that unknown, even if it's only a couple dollars a month, is a bigger fear than actually getting the bill and knowing what it is. And so for the reason of not knowing how much AWS is going to cost and knowing that it is more complicated to get started, we decided this cohort to change out AWS for Fly.io and Netlify. Well, the problem, and just like what I said of making too many changes all at once or trying to move on past an error message, we made two changes at the same time without necessarily testing how one would impact the other. So there is I think what the problem was that we put in our git ignore file, hey, this is our secret key. This secret key should not be exposed to the public. We don't want that secret key to get checked into our GitHub repo, because if someone got that secret key, they could basically get access to all of our user accounts through Clerk. So that makes sense. We put it in our git ignore. We had that locally. Everything's fine. Well, the problem is that we deployed our projects through Git. And so what ended up happening was that secret key didn't go up to Fly.io. And so when Fly.io tried to set up all of the authentication, it didn't have the secret key. So there is, and that's a normal problem. There is something called secrets that Fly.io supports, and there's a more secure way of kind of loading those in so that they don't get added to the Git repository, but Fly.io does know about them so that the server can go ahead and run that code. So totally get how it's frustrating. That is why we had to temporarily disable Clerk to get our deploys to work, because the server was trying to fire up the Clerk authentication to make sure that all of the data coming in was authorized. But because the private key was missing from the Git repository, it didn't know how to authenticate it and just crashed the server. So that's why we had to remove that. And down the road for next cohort, we'll definitely make sure that the Fly.io deployment process works a lot better with Clerk in particular. So you don't have to have a deployed version of your website working. You can demo for graduation right off of localhost, and you also don't need authentication working either. So if you want to have a deployed version that doesn't have Clerk, that's fine. If you want to have a local version that has Clerk working, that's fine. If you're like, but I really want to have a deployed version with Clerk working, schedule a one-on-one with Nathan. Because what I'm guessing what will happen is once he does that with one student, it will become much easier to share that with all the other students of, hey, this is how you can set up Fly to work with Clerk. And if you go through these steps, you can update your deploy and get all of that working. Does that give you a little bit more clarity?
Yes. So should I set up one with you and I set up one with Nathan. Should I just not go to yours tomorrow?
go to Nathan's first. And if you still can't get it working with Nathan, and he's stumped, reschedule with me.
Okay. Thank you.
We all, just like individuals, all of us as instructors have different strengths. And a lot of this is puzzle pieces fitting together. So, Nathan will have more experience with Fly and with secrets and all of that kind of stuff. And sometimes what we need to do is get all 3 developers in a room, get Ryan to come in, get me to come in, get Nathan to come in, and we just all go at it together, right? And that is sometimes called pair programming or pair debugging of, hey, we all have our different expertise. We've all worked on this. In fact, at my the day job, my other job, my full-time job, whatever you want to call it, my startup job, we are working on that right now of everyone has a different level of experience. And so we're trying to figure out, hey, I can get the mobile project started, then another developer's coming in and working with the Bluetooth devices and where their strong suit is. And a lot of that is just communication, right? Collaboration, figuring out what's going on there. So, and if you don't know, ask those questions, right? That's super important. Hey, I'm frustrated. I'm stuck here. I don't really know which way to go forward. Can someone help me out, right? And we definitely will try and find that support for you. Natasha Amberlin is correct. You do get 1 a month with me. That's an hour a month, or you can do 2 30-minute sessions a month. That is kind of dependent on 1, funding, and then 2, just frankly how busy I get. But you are welcome. My Calendly link does not disappear. We do not lock you out from that. That does not change. So you are welcome to schedule with me. And then I will be transparent at some point. If I'm getting a little too busy, we can adjust and go from there. But the main thing that I would say is very important is you're coming up with a game plan after graduation. And you don't have to do that today. You don't have to do that the week after graduation. Taking time off is important, right? Give yourself a little bit of a break and then say, okay, I'm out of this program. Where am I going next? How am I going to make sure that I'm on track? And hopefully next week, which is in person, by the way, on Lemoyne's campus, was our first week of class in the library computer lab. No. Okay. So, all the cohorts start blending together at some point. Next week's class, Laura will be teaching in person. We are setting up mock interviews as well, so you guys can get some interviewing practice. We will have Zoom fired up if you can only attend virtually, but we are encouraging you to attend in person as much as possible. Laura will be teaching same hours, Monday through Thursday, 5:30 to 8:30. We'll be doing mock interviews throughout that time period. She's going to help you get your career plans finalized. She's going to get you experience with resumes and cover letters. She's going to talk about all the tips and tricks that she knows. One of my favorites, I don't know if I've told you guys this or not, but if you're applying to a job that you really, really want, this is beyond they're kind of 2 different methodologies about thinking about applying to jobs. Unfortunately, this method has become the dominant method, which is you just go on Indeed, you go on Monster, you get your profile set up, you upload your resume, you type in developer, and a list of 100 things comes up, and you just go apply right down the list, right? I hate that. I wish it wasn't that way. Sometimes that's the best way to find the jobs. The other approach is taking a more tailored investment to it, right? Finding a local company that you really want to work for, messaging a developer on LinkedIn and saying, hey, I'm really interested in working at your company. I'd love to learn a little bit more about what you do. Would you be interested in grabbing a coffee? Right? Not asking about a job. All you want to do is learn about what their company does, what they do at the company, what they like about it. Now all of a sudden your foot's in the door. So once the conversation starts going well, you can ask a question like, hey, do you have any openings that aren't posted on your website yet that you think I would be a good fit for? Or, hey, have you guys ever considered an internship program or a shadowing program? Even if it's just a couple days a week, I would love to see, kind of look over your shoulder and see what you're doing. That takes a lot of courage to do that, right? That is a lot of confidence to go out above what their job openings are saying, reach out to someone and talk to them. OpenHack is a great opportunity to do that, shooting them an email, all kinds of ways to kind of get your foot in the door. One hack that I really like doing is if you are taking that individual approach, make sure you're writing a personalized cover letter. If that cover letter, you can take out the company's name that you're applying for and put in another company name, that is a terrible cover letter, in my opinion. That cover letter should be specifically about why you are excited to work there. And that should be different at every company you're applying for, right? And again, you may take this tailored approach, get down on yourself, realize that you're investing all this time, you're not getting any traction, and balance that out with what they call the spray and pray approach of spread your resume everywhere and just pray that someone gives you a response on it. Sometimes you get better results with that method than you do with the individual tailored method. But what I do is if I'm taking that individual tailored method where I know that I've got my foot in the door somehow, I've got a contact that I know is going to read my cover letter, I've got a friend that works at the company who's going to send my resume, my cover letter to a recruiting manager, whatever it is. I like to physically mail in my cover letter, a business card, and my resume. Obviously, that only works if you have a mailing address and you know that that mail is going to get checked. That only works if you have the name of a hiring manager that you can find. But what that means is that someone is going to roll into their office one day, go to the mailroom, pick your resume up in an envelope, go to their desk, and now they've got a physical piece of paper that they need to deal with. How much harder is it to open an envelope, read the cover letter, and toss it in the trash compared to hitting the delete button or the deny button on the computer? Those are the little tricks that can be different, right? That person has already invested more time just opening an envelope than they did hitting the deny button on a virtual application. So just something to think about. Again, I wouldn't be mailing 500 copies of your cover letter, but if you have that one foot in the door, if you know that person's name, if you can find their address, that only works for much bigger companies, but for a smaller company, it is something to consider. There is a post on the Syracuse.io channel, in the jobs channel, about someone who was getting down about their application and how many things they were applying to and getting no responses. I'm not signed into Syracuse.io on this account, but you can find it in the jobs channel. There are a couple posts on that. I do definitely recommend reading that. Insights into both methods of applying and some ways of battling imposter syndrome that are covered in there. So all things to consider. Laura will be doing a much deeper dive into that next week. Speaking of what's coming up, tonight I want to go over capstone presentations so you guys have an idea of how graduation is going to run. I also want to show you how to send an email using your backend code. So we are going to add a contact us form to our SHU application from, when was that? Last Thursday, but the Thursday before it. Just so you guys have a little bit of experience planning out a feature, making sure you understand where to add the code, and then also how we use a third-party API, not only on the front end, but also on the back end. So we're going to touch on contact us form and how to send an email. We would also use that system for something like resetting a password if Clerk didn't have that built in. So tonight, capstone presentations. Tomorrow night is tonight is capstone presentations and how to send an email. Tomorrow night is how to be an adult. We are going to cover all different kinds of things. I've actually put together an outline, and many of you guys have already submitted suggestions onto that thread. Keep that going. So in the CIC C5 channel, if you scroll up to yesterday at 1:55, I've got a brainstorming document of everything that I'm going to cover. If you have any suggestions, please add them to the thread. We are going to cover everything from credit and financial stuff to everyday life items, how I organize myself digitally, the importance of backups, things that I just wish someone had told me when I was 18. If you have any suggestions on that, feel free to add it, because tomorrow, believe it or not, is the last night I am teaching any content. Because Thursday night is Open Hack at 6 p.m. Hope to see all of you there. As we end the program, networking becomes even more essential. So hoping to see you guys there Thursday, Common Space, 6 p.m., where it always is. Next week, again, in person, it is at the second floor of the Lemoyne Library, all the way in the back. So if you just walk in the doors and keep walking, eventually you're going to hit a staircase. When you go up the staircase, it is the Museum. I did not pronounce that right, but it's the big computer lab, basically in the back right corner of the Lemoyne Library. Much easier to find than any of the other classrooms we've been in before. Laura will be teaching all of the career stuff Monday through Thursday. And then the last week of the program, week 24, is going to be all in person down at Common Space. And that's going to be your opportunity to help get any features over the finish line in your capstone. We will have all hands on deck. We invite all the instructors back. I don't know if Ryan or Nathan, well, Nathan can't make it. I don't know if Ryan will be in town. I will message him, but all the TAs are invited to come in. It's kind of all hands on deck, working through features. I'll be bouncing around. And then we'll also do a practice round of presentations on Monday, not next Monday, but the following Monday. And we'll go through and make sure you guys are feeling confident in your demos. I'm going to go through capstone logistics, presentation logistics next. Does anyone have questions about anything else?
I just, you said the Laura is going to be in the library on Lemoyne campus?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Monday through Thursday next week, in person, the Lemoyne Library. Walk in the doors, keep walking. You're going to hit a big staircase, take the staircase up to the second floor, and then the Museum lab is in the back right corner, right after the stairs. I got booted from Canvas, so I am authenticated in, and then I will share capstone logistics. Any other questions? Oh, why do we have so many documents? I can never find what we're looking for. Okay, here we go. I am posting this in Slack. I am going to post this in the Zoom chat as well. The dates for this document are not correct. Sorry, I forgot to update them. Everything else should be. I'm also going to post an example of slides. So, rundown for graduation. It is open to the public, and there is a meetup link as well. Feel free, friends and family are welcome to attend. We'll have cake at the end. It's going to be very similar to kickoff, except there will be more people from the public there. Jesse will give a brief overview of what the Careers in Code program is. I will get up on stage and give everyone a quick full stack lesson so everyone knows what you are demoing. Then we will set up an order on the Monday before graduation. Order does not matter to me. Some people like to get it out of the way. Some people like to be buried in the middle. Some people like to go very last. Doesn't matter. We'll have some democratic system for setting up an order of presentations. You will have 6 minutes to present. Roughly half of that should be on your backstory. We don't want to see your code. We don't want to know, just diving into this. You have all been on a roller coaster of a journey in the past 6 months. And because of that, we want a 3-minute summary of everything that you've been through in the past 6 months. We want to hear that as a story. We don't want an essay. We don't want paragraphs of text on a slide. Less is more on slides, and so are more images, right? So you're welcome to have a couple bullet points on there, but we don't want you reading off your slides. If you want, you can take some notes or have bullet points for what you are presenting, but the slides are there to keep you on track. They are not there for you to read off of. So the second link that I just sent is a rough outline. Do not just duplicate it. That is the most ugly slides that we could come up with. You are welcome to do your slides in whatever program you would like. Some people really like Canva. They've got a free tier. You're welcome to use that. Google Slides are great. And then Keynote on your Mac is also good. We will be using Zoom. So when you come up on the stage, you will not plug in any HDMI cables. You don't have to worry about any of that. You'll sign into the Zoom link that we use all the time. You will hit share screen. You will hit desktop 1. You will get your slides presenting. You will go through 2 to 3 minutes of your slides. You will talk about how much I made you cry. You will talk about how afraid of me you were. You will talk about how relieved you were when you got your capstone working. You will talk about your entire journey. You'll talk about your inspiration of how you got your capstone idea. You can talk about your expectations coming in versus what it was like coming out. You can talk about how you didn't expect the boot camp to be a real boot camp in terms of intensity. You can talk about the community and how you engaged with it. You can talk about things you loved. You can talk about things you absolutely hated. Whatever it is, we want the audience to be in tears before they can see your code. Make it emotional. I have had more than one student say that they have blacked out while they were giving their presentation. Do not worry, it is filmed and live streamed on YouTube for you to relive in all of its glory. We will have a live stream link for you on Monday. So if you want to share that with any friends and family who can't make it in person, you are more than welcome to. And they also don't need to tune in for the whole thing. So we will be calling you up on deck. You will know the order of all of the students. And then when we call someone up, we will say it is student so-and-so, student B is on deck, right? So you will know, hey, I'm coming up next. You can text friends and family if they are tuning in virtually to kind of see your couple minutes of the presentation, and then they can hop out of the YouTube live stream. Brandy, as long as you're not crying on the stage, I don't really care how much you've cried up until that point. It's just like, you know, we want you to keep your laptops, so you crying into it on the stage would be less than ideal. But you know, once you're off the stage, if you're a blubbering mess afterwards, that's totally fine.
Let's be really honest though, it'll probably still happen just out of stress or something, I'm sure.
And don't worry, she probably has Apple Care.
Jesus.
Hey, Apple Care doesn't make it it's okay to get water damage. It just makes it cheaper to get water damage. Totally different.
Well, see, it'll reduce my tears then because I'll pay a little less.
I think the last MacBook had 14 water sensors in it, so it is very hard to evade Apple in terms of damage. And apparently the salt content of tears makes those water sensors trip more often. I dated a genius for a couple months. I know the ins and outs of an Apple store. Genius.
None of this surprises me.
We will have a timer going in the back that will be 6 minutes and counting down. At the 3-minute mark, we will hold up a sign to begin demoing. If you do a 4-minute story and a 2-minute demo, that's okay. But you really need to be practicing between now and graduation on getting your slides together and practicing the timing, because you will only have a couple slides. You think your demo will go really quick. You will hit the start button on your phone timer, go through it all, present it, and realize that you are at 15 minutes and need to be at 6. Your content is going to take way longer to get through than you anticipate. So make sure before, not next Monday, but the following Monday, you have practiced your presentation at least once in the mirror, going through the slides, going through your demo, actually timing yourself on the phone, making sure that you are under 6 minutes. It is okay to go under. It is okay to be at 4 minutes. Not great to be under 4 minutes. Really bad to be over 6 minutes. So you really want to be in that time frame. Okay if you go a little quick, and it's okay knowing that your capstone may not be fully functional yet, right? So the goal is that by Tuesday's class, you are done with your capstone, and Wednesday is all about just practicing, feeling comfortable with it, and hanging out with everyone down at Common Space, knowing that you've reached the end of the program. Ideally, you're not working on your code on Wednesday. Sometimes it happens. We will be there for supporting you. What we don't want is you showing up at 5 o'clock on Thursday going, everything is broken. I am a big mess. I can't demo anything. We really want to avoid that as much as possible. In the industry, we call that a code freeze. We code freeze a week or two before all of the code goes out. And that means that if anyone finds a bug that is mission critical, we can go in and fix it in those 2 weeks. But we code freeze a day or two before we present anything, before anything goes out to production, knowing that if anything goes wrong, we want to have a clean slate. We don't want to be working on anything else. We want to be able to focus right on that bug without breaking anything else. So overall, how graduation will flow and an example slide deck of what content you should cover should be in those 2 links that I just posted. Make sure you bookmark them, or they are both in the Zoom chat if you want to in the Hack Upstate Slack if you want to reference that. After graduation, we will move you, we will post an invite into the CIC alumni channel as well. And then after graduation, we will also have a handoff between Laura and Kanan. Kanan works at Center State CEO, and his job is to get Erie 21 Lock 4 graduates jobs. So you'll be hearing from Kanan, transitioning you kind of into his caseload and seeing where you guys need the most amount of support. There's one other thing. If you have not opened the email that Jesse sent about keeping your laptops, there is a email that Jesse sent, I want to say last week. It is it's called Project Excite through Working Solutions, and they get grant money. I believe, don't quote me on this, Anyone who applies to the program and is eligible, which should be all of you guys, gets you access to $3,000 for advancing your careers. We take the cost of your monitors and laptops out of that $3,000, which is, I think, around $1,300. And then you have the rest of that money to spend on any eligible expenses. Those are community college courses, that can be certifications in IT, that can be all different kinds of things. So what we need from you guys is, in order for you to keep your laptops, we need you to open the email from Jesse, fill out that form, and then a day or two after filling out that form, you will get an email from Austin, Austen, or someone else from Working Solutions to schedule a meeting. That meeting is more than a formality. It also, Austin will go over kind of where you're at and what resources you can spend that money on after the program. So that is really, really great, because you get to not only keep your laptops, but you get access to money, free money to spend on continuing your education after this program. So I am going to pause just for a minute and start a poll, because if you have not filled out that form yet, I would like everyone to take 5 minutes to do so. Search for an email from Jesse in your email. I am starting a poll right now. And I will also go get the link in case you cannot find the email to the form. This is an all or nothing thing. So if one person does not fill out the form, we cannot invoice Project Excite for your laptops, which means you do not get to keep them. So that's why we're taking a minute right now to make sure everyone can fill out that form. I just dropped a link to it in the Zoom chat if you cannot find it. I want to make sure that everyone on this call fills out the form. If you have filled out the form, go look for an email from Austin. Make sure that you have scheduled with him. If you have not gotten an email from Austin, go fill out the form again, and that should trigger the email. Has anyone filled out the form a couple days ago and did not hear from Austin? Okay, I will reach out to Austin and say, hey, we just sent a bunch of students your way through the form. Just resubmit it if you're not sure. If you submitted it, if you have submitted it, that's totally fine. Austin should be in touch in the next couple of days to schedule that quick meeting with you and give you an idea of what resources you get access to.
I know in the email it said after you submitted it to send an email to somebody, and I sent the
To
email.
Jesse.
Yeah.
But I can just take everyone who voted yes in the Zoom poll tonight and let Jesse know that you did submit it. And then you'll hear from Austin probably sometime this week. Be on a lookout. Austin Johnson is his name, or Ethan Mensoni. Just be on the lookout for an email from them. If for whatever reason you don't want to keep your laptop or be part of the Working Solutions program, that is totally fine. You can return your laptop at the end of the program. Just shoot me a DM if you don't want to be involved with this. The form is quite invasive in all the data that it collects, but those are requirements of the funding. They need all of that information in order to get you guys some free money. So. If you don't want to keep your laptop at the end, just shoot me a DM and that is totally fine.
Flash has a change of address question in the chat.
No. No, you should be fine.
And is it okay to, I don't know if you already answered Shannon's question.
Yes, it is okay to submit the form twice. Give you guys a couple more minutes to fill out the form. You're not messing around with those laptops. It is a $1,100 or $1,200 laptop and $100 monitor. We just went into small claims court today for a student who graduated and did not fill or didn't graduate, didn't fill out the form, and didn't return the laptop. We have to get a lien against you. We have to mail it to your bank. It's all kinds of messy. So make sure we are very serious about getting these laptops back. If you do not fill out the form, we want to make sure that you guys get to keep it, and filling out that form, scheduling the meeting is the easiest way to go. If for whatever reason you don't want to keep a laptop, that's no big deal. Just have the laptop be ready to be returned at graduation. And just shoot us a message of a heads up of that's the option that you would like. We don't want to have to hunt you down. Trust me, it's not fun for anyone involved. Only 50% of you guys have voted. Please make sure you're filling out that form, and when you are done, vote in Zoom so I know we can move forward.
For the record, I am on my Careers in Code laptop right this moment. It's check the yes, I want to keep it box.
You don't realize how great these computers are until you go back to Windows, and then you're like, ew, this is so slow.
You sent out a poll? I don't have it for some reason. I don't know where it went. I don't know.
Um,
I'm under poll because there's just nothing there.
if you clicked on poll in Zoom and it doesn't come up,
Right.
maybe because you already voted in it.
No, because I just finished.
Okay, well, there's only one other person left, so I'm gonna let them finish and then I'll make sure that you are included in the results.
Thank you.
Whoever that one person is, please finish up or let me know that you are done and just have not submitted in Zoom. All right, going once, going twice. Anyone need one more minute? All right. And that, 1 second to download these results. Oh. My computer is mad at me that I haven't taught for a week, and it's making me sign into every single account. Okay. Before we dive into sending an email, does anyone have questions on their capstone? Have any questions about concepts? Have anything that they would like to prioritize? Any error messages that they've been stuck on for more than a couple hours? Any dumpster fires that needs a fire extinguisher? Blush.
I am stuck on like I'm pulling data from the backend and I'm stuck on like how to go through that data and filter it out because it's a big array of objects. And one of those objects has another array nested inside it and there's another layer. So I am not sure if I should like go back to making like multiple API calls to the backend, or should I just work around that big array in my JavaScript code.
So ideally what you're doing is making one API call to the backend, and then before the backend inserts that into the database, it's going to loop through the array and do multiple inserts into the database. That means that when you pull it out, you can do the same thing. You can pull out an array and then filter through that data however you need to, and then send that back to the front end. So ideally, the heavy lifting that you're doing for that is one call on the front end, multiple inserts on the database, but all of the magic should be happening on the back end, both putting it in and pulling it out.
Gotcha. So like how the filtering of data and everything, like again, like it's gonna be I'm gonna do it in my front end again. Sorry, I don't think I.
Ideally, you're doing it in your backend. So ideally, what you're doing is you're going to say, movies.findAll or ratings.findAll, where the user ID is equal to whatever user is signed in, or wherever the user ID is equal to who I'm trying to match them against. The database is much faster at filtering data than the backend is, which is faster than the front end is. So the front end is the slowest, the back end is the second slowest. I'm sorry. Database is the fastest, back end is second fastest at filtering, front end is third fastest at filtering. The caveat to that is the database will only be fast at filtering if the data is structured properly. So when we put arrays into the database, that causes some issues. Ideally, that is like a one-to-many relationship that you can do in your include. So I think because you've got a data structure that's a little bit more complicated than a traditional MVP, I would encourage you to schedule a one-on-one with me, because we can start pulling apart that object and making sure that your tables are structured properly. And once we do, it will be much easier to do the filtering. And once it's easier to do the filtering, it will be much easier to pass that data to the front end. And once the front end is only getting the data it needs, it will be much easier to display that.
Totally. Yeah, I've been stuck on it for like days, and every day like I get like a little bit closer. I look up something and find a solution in Stack Overflow and try to implement it. It's not like coming to fruition. So yeah, I'll do
I
that.
think it's going to be a situation where it's going to be one step backwards and two steps forward.
Mhm.
So we might need to blow a little bit up of how it's getting saved into the database in order to be able to extract it and use it a little bit more. One thing that we didn't spend a ton of time on, because I've never found an efficient way of teaching it, is database modeling and structuring of how to properly structure data in your database. But we can spend some time on a one-on-one on that. And that goes for everyone. If anyone is frustrated on saving data into the database, feeling like their data is not flowing, feeling like they're accomplishing the full stack, but they're still not getting it working the way they want it to, definitely feel free to schedule a one-on-one with me.
Is there a quick article that you can share that I read that before 101? Or anything I can look it up, look up?
The main thing that you want to be thinking about is one-to-many relationships. So whenever you have an array, ideally you're doing that with a has many and a sequelized relationship, where you're basically saying the object that holds everything is like the teacher's table, and then the array of all of the students is going to be in the students table. Unfortunately, I don't really have anything. That might be a lie. Doug, could you see if you can find in the cohort 4 outlines links to YouTube for SQL database design? And I also have one to Microsoft, I believe, that should be in one of the outlines. You might want to start at the cohort 4 schedule spreadsheet and then dig through a couple of those outlines to see if you can find those links. That might be a bit of a goose chase, but they should be in those outlines somewhere.
I'll see what I can find.
Thank you.
So SQL database design in cohort 4, what was the Microsoft?
It should be a link to Microsoft. And then if you just look in one of the 2 weeks worth of outlines for database that we did in cohort 4, it should be buried in one of those outlines.
Okay.
And then you can post those in the CICC 5 channel, because those would be good for everyone, everyone to see and have access to. Thank you. Other questions about capstones? Definitely expect the number of capstones to tick up in the last 2 remaining weeks of the program. Do not worry if you are behind. Do not worry if you have error messages. The goal right now is to get everyone over the finish line, right? So you are not going to meet with me and I'm going to banish you from graduation and kick you out of the program. It's all in this together mentality, right? We want to help you get over that finish line. This is, I cannot say, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I would have killed for a senior developer as a mentor when I was learning all of this stuff. I would have killed to be able to go to someone and say, I've got this error message and I'm frustrated beyond belief and I cannot get it to work, right? Take advantage of that as much as possible. And if there are no time slots that work with me and you really want to meet with me, shoot me a DM and say, hey, you don't have anything in your Calendly that works for me. Here are the times I'm available. Can you make any of these work? Chances are I probably can. Or you can always meet with other TAs as well, have them help you out. Do not wait until the last minute. Do not wait until the Monday of graduation and go, oh, that capstone thing is kind of important. Make sure we get you over the requirement line. And secondly, and probably more importantly, make sure you've got an idea of priorities and a to-do list, right? Make sure you've got an idea of not just it's all broken, not just I need to fix it, actually breaking down the features and sub breaking down those features and saying, what does it take for me to meet the requirements, and what features do I really want to get done to show off in my demo? Those are the two most important things. Any other questions before we write some new code? Before we get into the email, does anyone have a feature that they're dying to see how I would make it? In any project. Doesn't have to be capstone related. I am a code monkey. You can make me dance.
I have one.
Yes.
It's more kind of CSS React, maybe,
Sure.
like animating. Taking a picture and making it bigger when you hover over it, and then
Yeah.
and it goes back to like long.
Yeah.
Like,
do you have do you mind if I show you in your code?
Sure.
Go ahead, share screen. We can do it in there if that's where you want your images to show up.
Yeah, I wanted it to be in here if I had time, other than the database part.
Yeah. So all we need to do is we're going to throw your image in, and because your image is in the source directory, we have to import it, right? If it were in public, we could just use the file path.
Okay.
But because it's in your source folder, we import it from /ins2, and then we say img src is equal to the insp2 that we just imported. And then we can you here, let me do it like this, npm start. And do you have this set up to a route yet? Is that here? Yes. Okay.
Yep.
So we will
I have to get
say
rid of that background though.
yeah, so I'm gonna throw everything in a row.
Okay.
And then let's just throw it in a col3 so that it will size properly. And then we'll take our image and throw it in there. And this would work if it were in a table or whatever. And then we want to throw our class name of img fluid on it. And so, you know, you could see how we could easily put in other columns. But what we can do is add a class name on this, of like hover effect. And then we can say we're going to make a new file called inspiration.css. We will target our hover effect. We will import our inspiration.css. And then we can say on the hover effect, when we hover over the image, we want to set the height of the image to 140% the original size. So now we hover over it and okay, that's kind of working. We can add in our width of 140%. Now when we hover over it, oh, the width won't go outside of the column. That's interesting. Make sure I save that and refresh just to make sure. Yeah. Okay, so what I think we have to do is in the inspiration, we're gonna target the column. And we are going to say overflow visible. I don't know if this is actually going to work.
Oh.
Interesting. I have to do some research on that. Give me a second. Doug, any ideas?
I have to admit, I was a little bit tuned out. I was hosting database articles.
We are trying to make, when we hover over the image, we're trying to make the image bigger than it was, as kind of an effect, and that is working on the height, but that is not working on the width, because the width of the image is constrained by the column. So if we took this outside of the column, the row and the column,
Mm-hmm.
and we said that all images by default should have a width of 400 pixels. That should...
Oh, you have .img.
Ah, thank you.
Yep.
That shrinks it down. And then when we make it bigger, well, it's working. When you hover over it, it gets really big.
Oh, so it's going to 140% of its natural size.
Oh,
I'm guessing.
okay. So let's
Or no, it'd be going to 140% of its container. Isn't percentage?
Oh, you're
what-
right. Okay, so if we just go back to pixels. There you go.
Okay.
So hover off of it, hover over it. Now that's working. That obviously that might be too big, but you could easily play with that here and, you know, go down to 300 and then like 450, and that would still give you your little hover effect. Now, depending on where you're going to be displaying those images, if you're displaying it in a table or something like that, that may cause you some issues. Normally what we see in user interfaces is, instead of the image growing, especially if it's in a table, the rows and columns shift around, and then your eye is really confused because it doesn't expect words to move. And when you expand the image, sometimes the words would have to move to make space for the image. So instead, what we usually see is something called a modal, where you can click on the image and it will kind of gray out the background of the screen and then show the image in full size, taking up 100% of the width or the height. And then when you click the little X button, it will take you back to the table where you can see the little thumbnail.
Okay.
So just something to think about. This could work depending on how you're showing your images. But normally we would see something where you could, you know, click on it and you'll see a bigger version of it. Think of like an e-commerce site where you can like see the t-shirt that you're buying, and then when you click on it, it gives you the full view. I think Amazon does that, where if you just pick a product, you know, you can zoom in on it, but then I don't know if they do a modal anymore. Yeah, here we go. So they do something like this where you can see the image bigger and then you can still click through them and see the different stuff. So that's how I would probably do it from a user experience. And if you look at Bootstrap, they do have a modal with some examples in here. So you can play around with that if you're interested.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yes.
Other questions?
I have one. Can you implement like one of those sites that you scroll down and kind of like elements move around? Like a picture like kind of comes in or has a parallax effect?
Yeah, parallax is tricky. I've always used basically website themes that have the parallax built in. I let me see.
Or like even if there's a like a library that helps you do it.
So a parallax effect, just so everyone has an idea of what parallax is. There's one really cool one with like the depth of the ocean. See if I can find it. Parallax is basically when different things scroll at different rates.
I think Neil.fun is where the ocean thing.
Well, there's a space elevator. I'm sure the other one is here. Okay, so this one. So this is kind of interesting. You like you can see the rate of everything here, but then pay attention to the elevator. When you start scrolling up, you'll notice that the elevator kind of goes at a different rate. And so there are items that are like static in the page. But when I'm all the way down at the bottom, you'll see the elevators at the bottom of the page. But then as I start getting up higher, the elevator kind of centers itself on the page. And so things kind of scroll at a different rate. The other example, thank you, Doug, for posting this, is that you can kind of see how this stays static on the page, but then as you're scrolling, other things aren't static. And while you're going, the rate of the background change is different than the rate that you're scrolling. So parallax is all about multiple animations going on and having different scroll rates so that the background is scrolling at a different rate than the items on the page, which is scrolling at a different rate than, say, the depth gauge, which isn't scrolling at all. And so there's some cool stuff that you can do with that. There are also, let me see if I can find one more. This is a good example of one where when you start scrolling, the background stays static, but the page content is what's scrolling. And then if you get down to a certain point, you'll notice the background changes again. And the content is scrolling, but it's scrolling at a different rate than the video scrolls. So it's this notion of having multiple layers of content and then having that content scroll at different rates. There are
a lot of people on that weed.
There are some really cool examples of this. I will post this link in Zoom. Palash, let me get back to you on that. I'm gonna look and see if I can find anything quickly during the break that I can implement. That might be something that I have to prep for before I could cover it. But I will get back to you on that to see if there's an easy CSS or JavaScript framework that we could implement and do a little example on.
Thank you.
Parallax is hard to get right, but can be a really powerful effect once you get it working. The other thing I can just look to see.
Like I remember it using in WordPress, and all it does like fixes the position of, say, the hero image of the website. But then I'm not sure how to apply it on like without WordPress.
I have done it in WordPress as well. This is my friend's mental health counseling business, and I made a site for him. And when you scroll down, you can see the rate that the hero image is shrinking is different than the rate that the background is kind of fixed. So it looks like this is kind of hovering on top of the background. And then when you're sliding up, it does the same thing. And then down here for this background image, it kind of makes it feel like the content is moving faster than the background is. And then, you know, same for this. So this kind of feels like it's a layer behind the page, and then the content is transparent on top of it. Yeah, I don't know that I've ever done it outside of WordPress. So I would have to find I'd have to find the right framework for that before I could teach it. Definitely not something I would try to implement on my own. But I'm not a CSS wizard. If you're a CSS wizard, then you can go for it.
I mean, if it's like too much effort, this is not like really a necessary thing. Like
I can look into it.
Okay.
Doug also posted a I guess it's a game that he's done parallax effects in.
But that was a lot of JavaScript. It would be, I think it would be overkill for a scrolling page.
Yeah. Okay. Before we dive into the email sender and the contact form, let's take a break because we're at an actual break time. Be back at 7:15. We will dive into sending an email, and then tomorrow you get to hear me lecture for 3 hours on how to adult. I will see you at 7:15. Welcome back, everyone. All right, so very common to need to be able to send an email based off of a user interaction, summary of everything that happened in your database over a week, a forgot your password, reset link, all kinds of important stuff of why you need to be able to send an email. There is a couple of different ways of doing this. One is integrating what we call an SMTP server. An SMTP server is if you remember setting up like your first smartphones or setting up your email client when you get a new job. You get these credentials from the IT department. You type in your username, your password. You type in the URL of the email receiving server and the email, the IP address or the domain name of the email sending server, right? Well, you could do that, but that's a little old school. It turns out that there are services that really make it easier for you as a developer to go send email. The problem is that we can't send that email directly on our front end. If an end user could send emails on the front end, they could hijack your email, right? They could send emails on your behalf and they could send them to anyone and impersonate you. So just like we need the back end in order to connect to our database and facilitate that connection, we also need the back end to facilitate the connection of sending the emails, to make sure that when someone fills out a contact form on your website, they can't basically hijack it and make it into their own email sending client. So a couple services that do that. The one that I use is called SendGrid. There are a couple other ones. Mailgun is a popular one. AWS has one called SES, Simple Email Service. Doesn't really matter which one you use. Some of them have a free tier, some of them don't. But whenever you've got code that needs to generate some kind of email, using one of those services is generally preferred or overgoing the old school route of SMTP. Mainly because SMTP is was designed more for human sending emails. It wasn't designed for your code to send emails. Normally, I would have you guys follow along with me and create an account at SendGrid. But it turns out that that process always takes about 30 minutes because they generate a verification link for you that they send to your email, and that takes forever for it to come in. And then once it does finally come in, your API key doesn't get activated for a little bit. So I'm going to recommend that everyone just follow along with me here. Before we dive in, though, we kind of need to identify what the steps are that we want to pull off. So what I like to do is just brainstorm that somewhere either in your code or in a note. So I'm going to just make a new file, and I will call it steps.txt. And we're going to kind of just think through, all right, we know what's the goal. Let's identify that first. Goal. A user can fill out a contact form that will send an email to me with the contents. Hopefully pretty straightforward. Hopefully we understand that. Now, before we dive into our code, before we make any of that happen, let's kind of try and plan out the steps. So if there's a contact form, I need to make that, right? So 1, front end, make contact form. 2, what's next? We have to use state and call the API, and all of that's going to happen on the form submit. So still on our front end. Connect form on submit. 3 on the front end. Make a fetch to our back end, including the form info. Tara.
Just a quick question. Can you send us the link to the site that we fill out to get the API and stuff? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name.
Oh, for SendGrid?
Yeah,
Yep.
SendGrid, that's what it was.
Yep. You got it. You can sign up for a free account there, and then we're going to go through the steps of how you set up your domain and all of that kind of stuff. Okay, 4, where do we go from the front end? Where are we fetching to? Come on, we've been doing full stack for over a month now. No PHP. Where do we fetch to? Yes, Shannon, just come off mute and repeat that. To the back end.
Yep.
You forget I can read lips.
Okay.
To our back end. Our back end needs to make a new endpoint to receive the request coming from the fetch from number 3. right? When we fetch here, we're fetching to the back end. That means at our back end, we've got to deal with this request. Now that we're dealing with this request, this is where in the back end, we want to send our email. But we got to do some work in between there. And here is where those new steps come in. So what we're going to say is 5, set up SendGrid domain. 6, install SendGrid package. 7, read SendGrid npm docs to figure out how to send email. And 8, configure SendGrid so we can send email in request. Those are the new steps. Then we are going to tell our backend to send the email. And probably we need to 10 update front end to say email was sent. This is the heart of engineering. This is saying, hey, this one sentence seems easy enough, but any one of these steps alone is enough to make me cry. So what we do is we break this down a little bit and we say, all right, engineering, taking an advanced, complicated problem and breaking it down into steps. Are there any steps here? I know there are a couple new steps, so don't panic too much. Are there any steps here that don't make sense? Are there any steps here where you're going, I want a little bit more detail on that before we try? We're good? No questions? I'm going to start a live share for you guys if you want to follow along. I'm not going to encourage you to code along with this one, but if you would like to follow along in the live share instead, you are more than welcome to. We good to get started? Okay, front end, we got to make our contact form. So I am in our Shoes app, and I don't want to just throw the form in here. Well, first of all, I should make sure my project's running, right? And that's a good note for your capstones. We don't just start writing code. We got to get our project started. We got to make sure there are no error messages so we don't have a background that looks like Brandy's. So what we start with is our npm start on our backend. We start our backend first. We make sure there are no error messages here. Then we go back over to our front end, npm start over there, make sure our front end starts, and when it does, make sure that there are no crashes. Make sure our data is coming out the way that we want it to. Make sure we are good to go there. Everything looks right there, so now I can get started on my contact form. Tempting to put it just right in my app.js, but good to have that code separated out. So I'm going to make a new file called contact.js and say my contact is a new component that's going to return a form that's going to export the default contact so that we can head back over to our app.js and throw our contact in here and make sure that that import worked. Got that there. Maybe let's throw in a horizontal rule up at the top. Make sure that that line's there, kind of separating everything out, and now we can get started. So when I think of a contact form, I think of 3 things. I think of the name of the person. Maybe let's put this in a row and have a call that's got their name and an input type text with the name of name, and save that and make sure that that shows up. There's my name. I wanted a line break between these, so I'm going to throw that in. I'm going to rinse and repeat. I'm going to take my call. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to change this to their email and email and email and come back over. Got that going on there, but it's not the full width of the column. That's not the most prettiest input. So I can throw a class name of form control on both of these. Go back. Now that's looking a little bit nicer. And then the last thing I will do is figure out where my row ends. That's down here. I'll throw in another div class row with my column, and I will throw in my text area with a name of message. And I should also probably throw in a label for that that says message. That looks hideous because we can put our form control on it. I save, I come over. I get a pretty quick form out of all of that. Last thing I need to do is get a send button going on down there, right? So I come in, I do another div class name row. Let's make it a div class name of a call 5.4 and leave this empty as a spacer. Then we can do another div class name of a call 4 and do my btn primary and say send. Add my type of submit on that, save, and there's a full width. And I don't remember the class off the top of my head. Be careful when you link to Bootstrap documentation. That took me to Bootstrap version 4, which is so dumb of Google. I'm on Bootstrap 5, and now I can look for full width, and all I need to do is put it in a D grid, I guess. And that made my button full width. And then we can fix this with a little style, margin top 15, save, come over here, get a little spacing there, and I now have my contact form. I know that was very fast. Take a step back, even though it may be an old question. Does anyone have questions about the front end of building a form out? Everyone good? Okay, not hearing any objections, so we will keep on going.
I have a
Before we
question.
do, though, every
Can-
time. Oh, you have a question, Shannon?
I do.
Shoot.
Class name, why is it form control?
Form control is what is the Bootstrap class that like applies all the Bootstrap styling. So just like we've got BTN and BTN primary, if we take this out and we look at the input, it's like ugly and not styled and doesn't have the right hover, doesn't have the spacing and the padding. The form control is what Bootstrap applies the styling to, so that when we drop it in, we get the nice padding and the light blue hover effect and the rounded corners and all of that stuff.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? And the only reason I know that is because I've used Bootstrap a gazillion times, but you can always go to the documentation, head to forms, look at the form control, and you will see that they use form control here to apply all of the styling like we have on our website. Okay, so before we move on, we always want to go back to our steps file and kind of cross things off, right? So we are going to put a little check mark at the end of this, because as engineers, very easy to get lost in just that momentum, right? We want to be able to keep track of this so that when we're coming back to it, we know where we left off and what we're working on. Okay, connect form to on submit. So we are going to say contact on submit, contact form submitted. We're going to do our contact form submitted. We know it's going to be async because we're making an API call. We are going to event and event prevent default. Before we get too far, we should test this. So I'm just going to console log out form submitted. I'm going to go back to Chrome. I'm going to type in A, B, C. I'm going to hit send. Looks like nothing happened, but if I go into my inspect, into my console, I can see that I broke something. I don't know why I made that a BTN. That should be button spelled out. And clear this out, hit send, b@c.com, hit send, and I get my form submitted. So I know everything's connected there. Little baby steps on testing, right? We're not just going to copy and paste on submit code from another project because that's where on submit is working. We're breaking it down step by step, making sure that we understand it, right? So we get our form submitted, everything's rocking and rolling there. We go back to our steps. We throw our check mark in at the end of that, and we move on to the next one, make a fetch to our backend, including the form info. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to say, I don't need that anymore, but I am going to need a response that's awaiting my fetch from my API URL that I already have created here. And that's got my localhost 3080 in it. And I'm going to say contact form is going to be a method of post. It's going to have headers of a content type of application JSON. It's going to have a body that is going to be a stringification of my name, which is coming from my event, target, elements, name, value, and then we rinse and repeat and grab the email. And we also make sure that we are getting the message. And before I can check this off, before I know if this is working, I need to be able to test this. Well, in order to be able to test it, I really need to do this, set up the backend part and make sure it's working. So to do that, I'm going to head back to my backend. I'm going to get a server.post. The post lines up with the post here. The contact form here is going to line up with the contact form endpoint here. And we are going to async our request that the fetch is making. And we are going to just res.send an empty object back so it's getting something. And then I'm also going to console log out my rec.body to make sure that it's working. So I save, I pull this up, scroll down to the bottom of my terminal. Little pro tip, you can always throw in empty line spaces at the bottom of your terminal. While it's running, it won't hurt anything. Now I can go back to my front end, I hit the send button, and over here, I make sure I've got all of my data sending in. Because I do, we're going step by step here. We are going back to our steps, and we have now completed the make a fetch from our backend, including the form info. And we've also made sure that our endpoint is receiving the data in the request in the backend. Pausing there. Do we have any questions about this or the backend code?
Actually, I do have a question.
Shoot.
So if you had any of these submissions as a component down below, is there anything you would have to send back up to these?
If you're using controlled inputs, yes. If you are attaching it to state on change and value to the state, you would have to pass the set functions and the state value down into the child component and then use them up in the parent component. However, if you're using an uncontrolled form, you are able to pull out the elements, even if the elements are in a child component, as long as the form is in the parent.
Okay. So when you say a controlled form, is that like the class name that Shannon asked about, or is that like either like a
That-
text input versus like a drop down?
That is value and on change. So a controlled input would be
Oh, okay.
so on change of the input, take whatever the value is and set it into state. Set email is going to update it up here. That email value is going to update, which will update the value of the input right here. And because of that, when we want to go get the value, when we send it in from the API, we pull the value out from the state instead of from the event target.
Oh, okay. I was definitely overthinking that with my capstone, so I appreciate that.
Yep, controlled versus uncontrolled. The benefit of this, it seems like it's a lot more code, but what we could do is say after the form has been submitted, set the email address back empty to blank, and we could do that in React because it's a controlled input. We would not be able to do that with an uncontrolled input, which we've got name and message right now.
Awesome, thank you.
So definitely pros and cons to controlled versus uncontrolled inputs. I went off the deep end for the first 4 or 5 years that I used React and made everything a controlled input. I am learning that not everything needs to be controlled anymore. So that is definitely something to think about. Plush, mutable versus immutable. So think about it, fancy words for changeable and not changeable. Technically, email right here is an immutable object or an immutable variable. In other words, you're not supposed to change the email directly. What you can do, however, is use a function that is designed to change that value. So what we are not allowed to do is say, email is equal to empty string. Email is immutable because it's in state. This would cause your React code to do all kinds of weird things. So instead of being able to change what our value is, instead we are able to set what the new value is. So in order to do that, we use the set function and do it like this, which is the correct way of doing it. Mutable and immutable, computer science nerds that got their panties in a bunch and made up new words for changeable and not changeable. They make more of a bigger deal out of that concept. But what they're really trying to get across is if it is immutable like state is, don't just make it equal to something new. Make sure you're using the set function. And sometimes immutable variables are strictly immutable, right? We can't say const API test equals ABC and then be like, just kidding, API test now equals 1, 2, 3. You will see, well, normally it would give me an error right off the bat and say, hey, this is a const. Constants are immutable by definition, so we're not allowed to do this. If you need to be able to do that, you make this a let instead, and now we just change that from an immutable variable to a mutable variable.
I have one more question with the forms. So like whenever you set up a form using React, it like gives you an error in the console, like you have added a value to it and not a default value to it. Can you cover that?
Yep, trick to that. If you take a look here, why didn't that give me an error message? Email, input value. So one thing that you may get is an error message that says the component is changing from an uncontrolled input to a controlled input. What's happening there is I set up my use state, but I started it out as null, right? When you don't put anything in the parentheses, it defaults to null or maybe undefined. Don't quote me on that. Form inputs don't like starting out as null. They like getting started out as an empty string. So if we put that empty string in here, refresh our component and type in ABC, that solves the issue. If you do want it to start out with a value, if we wanted it to start out as abc@def.com, we could just set that into our state here instead of using value or default value. That would make it so that when we refresh the page, something is already typed into it, and we also avoid an error message. That's if it is a controlled input. If you want to use a starting value with an uncontrolled input, you want to use default value instead of value. Does that help? Cool. Any other questions on this?
Can TAs ask questions?
Yes.
The elements property of the element, what is that, and where does it get the keys, name, message, and email?
It pulls that from the name of the attribute passed into the input. So this email and this message are what we need to line up with the name and message up here. I can never remember if it is name ID, name or ID, and I don't know if it's either or both or what the priority is of that. But it's working with the name attribute on the form inputs. So that's what I'm working with. And then event is a native JavaScript thing that the on submit is generating. The target is what that event was on. And then elements is actually a document object model property that is including all of the children elements. They're not quite components, but all of the HTML tags that are inside of that event target. So you can think of elements, it's not technically an object, but you can think about it as an object. And when we are accessing .name and .message, we're basically getting access to this input right here. So everything that we're doing in event target elements message would be the equivalent in vanilla JavaScript of saying document.get element by ID message, and then putting a message on that.
Oh, so is this React specific syntax, or is this just JavaScript DOM syntax?
This should be JavaScript DOM syntax that React mirrors.
Okay, so every element, every DOM element has an elements property that is a object of the elements inside of that.
Let's test. I believe so. But we can always go to our JavaScript console, get element by ID form and get the elements out of it, and you will see we get our inputs. And then from there, we could say, go get the first one and then get the value of that. And if we type in ABC and hit enter, we get our ABC coming out down there in our vanilla JavaScript.
So it's an array, but you're able to target the items by their name attribute.
Yeah, that's where it's like you can think of it as an object. It's technically an HTML form controls collection, which is voodoo, JavaScript voodoo that I don't understand. How is it both an array and referenceable with dot notation? Goes right over my head at how that actually works, but it does, and so I leave it at that.
Thank you.
Yes. Shannon, good question. So we changed our name and our message are uncontrolled inputs. Uncontrolled meaning that React is not controlling them. We're letting the browser control the value of them. But as an example, we changed our email input to a controlled input. In other words, we told React on change, tie that event into the state and also use the value coming from the state. So there are two different ways of making an input in React. We can make a regular input, not put a value and an on change on it, and let that be an uncontrolled input, at which point we need to get the values out using the event of the form on submission. Or we can make React control the inputs. We have to add an on change and a value to it. Both of those right here, this on change is using set email, this value is using email. Both of those are coming from our React up here. That is now a controlled input, which means that we can use this email right down here. And you can technically intermix them, right? We've got name and message that are uncontrolled inputs right now, and we've got name, which is a controlled input right now. The benefit of React controlling it is that if I want to clear this form after I make the API call, I can just set my email to whatever I want. Right now, I wouldn't be able to clear out the name or the message because they are not controlled by React.
So you could change them to controlled though.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Two different ways of doing it. And we're going to see at the end of this why it's not important for them to be controlled. Because basically I'm going to make it once the form is submitted, the entire form just hides and it says, thank you for submitting the form. So I'm going to do that after we get the email sending. Other questions on this code? Okie doke. Okay, so I'm going back to my steps. Now it says I've got to set up a SendGrid domain and install the SendGrid package. I am already signed into SendGrid. This is what my SendGrid looks like. This is also what I use for MaxSpot that sends you your one-on-one recordings. So when a recording is available, what ends up happening is Zoom sends me what is called a webhook. A webhook is basically when one API goes to talk to another API. So Zoom's API goes to MaxSpot's API and says, hey, a new recording is available. Here are all of the details of the recording, the share URL, all of that stuff. Well, MaxSpot has an endpoint that verifies that that Zoom is the one that's sending in the information. Then it generates out a HTML email, pulls the recording URL, drops it into the email content, and fires that email off. In fact, you can see I have a repository on GitHub. And basically what is happening here, if we go into the email content, you can see what gets generated out here. Hopefully you guys, if you've done a one-on-one with me, You've seen these emails before. One is generating it in plain text. The other one's generating in HTML so that we get access to things like the font and being able to use images, and then also being able to use A tags with the share URL. Well, what ends up happening is if we take a look at our server.js, you can see we are using sgmail. Sgmail is a package that gets installed with NPM. We are going to see how we generate out an API key in a moment. And once that API key is generated out, what happens is the webhook will fire off from Zoom. It will include some credentials information that I make sure that the actual request is coming from Zoom. So you guys can't fake a request and fire off recording emails. Kind of a requirement of Zoom to do that. And then you will see that it does this thing down here that says get the invitees. That is integrated in with Calendly, so I know what recording is associated with what booking. And then you can see I call this function called send emails. Send emails is linked to a function somewhere called send emails. And all it's doing is looping through any of the people who were on that invite from Calendly, generating out the message, including the email address that's coming in from Calendly, and then firing off the message using SendGrid. If you guys are interested in this code, I will drop it in the Zoom chat, because this is quite literally running on a little 2x3 server that's sitting down in my basement. And every time that you have a meeting with me that has a recording, this is the code that's running that sends off that email automatically. It got to the point where I was doing like 45 one-on-ones a week, and dealing with the recordings was insane. And so this is the code that was born from it. So I'm actually going to use this as my reference code. Once you get it working in one place, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You always can go back to previous code. Maybe if it's with an employer that you're no longer hired from or hired with, you shouldn't have that code anymore. But other than that, you can always go back, reference code you've already written, kind of figure it out from there. So I'm going to put that off on my other monitor. Once you create your SendGrid account, it is very important to go through what is called domain authentication. If you do not go through domain authentication, almost every email that you send will get flagged as spam. And then you'll be really mad because you'll get all of these clients saying, I'm not getting any of the emails that the system is generating. Turns out they're going to spam. Really messy. Good idea to set up authentication. And that goes for no matter how you're, no matter what API, email API you're using. In SendGrid, we go to settings and we go down to sender authentication. You will see that I've got a couple things set up. I didn't actually mean to create this and delete that. I already have a couple domains set up that I actually use in my SendGrid account. And now I get an infinite loader because I've made it angry. Oops. Okay, so what I am going to do is click on authenticate your domain. And in here, we set up whatever our cloud host is. You'll notice Namecheap is an option in here. I don't have a Namecheap domain right now, so I'm going to pick Cloudflare, which is where I register my domains. And then you can also say yes for branding the links on it. Branding the links makes it so that when they click on a link, it doesn't go to sendgrid.net and then redirect them. It will take them to a link with your domain in it and then redirect them to wherever they're linking. Randy, what did I say? What was I awfully specific on?
Oh, it was the comment about having code from a former workplace that you shouldn't have anymore.
No, I am very good about that. Intellectual property is something that you need to be careful about. And some employers will like say, oh, I don't care, or you did that on contract work, or like you should never. There was a big lawsuit maybe 2 years ago, that a guy working at Tesla got hired at, maybe it was Waymo or one of the Chinese self-driving companies. And he basically took like hundreds of thousands of lines of code that Tesla had paid him to write and went over to another company and was like, here, I wrote all of this code. This is a hiring gift. You are welcome to use it. That's a big no-no. You can't do that legally. And he got slapped with a huge fine. So you do want to be careful about using code from previous employers, especially without their permission. Okay, so once you get this set up, it will say what's your domain name that you want to set up. I'm going to use qscode.com. Once you connect in there, they're going to give you a couple CNAMEs that you need to set up. And this is very common for hosting. You may have seen this with something similar with Nathan and getting fly.io set up. A CNAME, again, is just tying a subdomain on your domain name to a different domain name. You can think of it, it's kind of like a shortcut. It's not quite a redirect, but you're basically pointing one piece of your domain to another different domain. So again, I know you guys are using Namecheap. The interface is kind of the same no matter where you go. This is what my Cloudflare looks like. You want to get into the DNS. DNS is where all of the CNAME stuff would live. You would hit add a new record. There are all of these different record types, so you want to pick CNAME. Then you come over here, copy the first part, paste that into the name, go back over here, copy the value, paste that in, then go ahead and hit save, and then you rinse and repeat. Add a new record, you add the CNAME, you copy it here, you come over here, you paste it, you grab the second one, you copy it, you paste it, you hit save, you add in all 5 of those. Once you get all 5 of those in, you essentially hit the verify button. Check off, I've added these records. You hit verify. It takes a minute to go through. DNS is not instantaneous. So if it doesn't work on the first try, sometimes it takes up to 24 hours for DNS to update. So make sure you give yourself plenty of time. If you are making any changes in this, go ahead and hit verify. That adds in the domain and you are good to go. I'm actually going to delete that because we're going to use my zane.tech domain that I already have set up. Does anyone have questions about domain authentication, why we set it up, how we get started? Yay, DNS. Okay. The other thing that we need to do is set up an API key. Now, API keys should never be exposed to the front end, to a GitHub repository, or anywhere on the internet or public. So I am going to generate an API key that will be visible in this YouTube video. Not a good idea, but I'm going to delete it at the end of the night. You can see SendGrid makes it very easy to set up API keys and then as easy to just hit delete API key to deactivate it. The reason why you don't want your API key leaking is because people could send emails impersonating you from your domain name. So you do really want to be careful about your API keys, making sure that you are not exposing that. Shannon, you will need to set all of this up if you want your front end to be able to send an email. However, this is certainly not a requirement of graduation. So if you don't get all of this set up, this is just a video you can go back and reference if you ever do work on a project where you need to be able to send an email through your API. And you're welcome to schedule a one-on-one with me if you want to go through these steps and get them set up. So I'm going to make an API key. I'm going to call it cohort 5 example. I am going to say it is restricted access because if this API key did leak, I wouldn't want them to be able to get access to my entire SendGrid account. So I'm going to come down here and go down to mail send and say that they should be able to send an email but that's all this API key should be able to do. They shouldn't get access to my security. They shouldn't get access to my email logs. They shouldn't be able to make their own API keys. We're just limiting it to email send here. I'm going to hit create and view. Note here that it says for security reasons, we cannot show it to you again. So if you lose this API key, you actually have to delete it and make a whole new one. So we don't want to do that. We want to be careful. We're not quite ready for this yet. So I'm going to go back to my steps and it says set up SendGrid domain. I did that. So I'm going to add my little check mark. Then I need to install the SendGrid package. Where do we go to install SendGrid? Where have we gone in the past? NPM. So we're going to go to NPM and we're going to do a search for SendGrid. And the first thing that comes up, Twilio SendGrid Node.js mail service. So I'm going to click into that and I'm just going to briefly read the docs. It says obtain an API key. Cool. We just did that. Set up your environment variables. We're going to see how we do that in a second. Install a package. Okay. Let's do that. I'm going to copy my install. I'm going to go over to my back end. None of this is done in the front end, right? We only do this in the back end. Control C to stop my server, Command V to paste my install. Once my install is done, I'm going to npm start again before I forget to reboot my server. Then I'm going to go back over to the documentation and they're going to show me, hey, I need to set up my SendGrid mail. I need to set my API key, and then I am able to send an email with this information, and then I need to use my send function in order to get that working. Okay, so let's go step by step there. I am going to go up to the top. I'm going to say import my SG mail from @SendGrid mail. Notice I'm using import here instead of this require syntax. The import is the newer syntax that we are able to use because in our package.json, we set the type to module. So we import our SG mail, then we need to set our API key. Well, I don't want to just paste in my API key in my server.js because this is going to get uploaded to my GitHub repository and I don't want to expose my API key. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import my SendGrid API key from /SendGrid API key.js. I am then going to make my SendGrid API key.js, and I'm going to export the super secret API key that they gave me right here. But I'm going to do something on top of that. I don't want my SendGrid API key to show up in my Git repository. So I'm going to make a new file called .gitignore that says, hey, don't let my SendGrid API key get into Git. Just go ahead and ignore it. Now, back to Shaquota's question from the beginning of class, this could cause issues when you deploy. We should be using fly.io secrets in addition to gitignore to make sure that our deploys would go through. But for now, this is just a good level of security saying, hey, don't let my API key accidentally get published to Git. Don't make that show up in the repository. Because we've imported that, I can now go back to my reference code and see that I need to say sgmail.set API key to my SendGrid API key that I have exposed. Any questions on that so far? Okay, so now let's connect it all in. My steps say that we need to read the npm docs to figure out how to send an email. And we need to configure SendGrid so we can send email in the request. Well, I just read the docs and here's the quick start. right? So I would say that we accomplished that. We can check that off. And configure SendGrid so we can send email in the request. That's what we just did right here, right? We said set API key. Now SendGrid knows that we're authenticated, we're allowed to send those emails. So we can check that off as well. So now in the back end, we got to actually send the email. So I'm going to pull up my reference code here. And I'm going to say, when we get a post for the contact form, I'm going to make a new message. And it's going to get sent to me. And it's going to be from also me. Now, be careful here. Whatever domain we authenticated is what it needs to come from. We can send it to whatever email address we want. Oftentimes, we would put in a client's email address here so that when the contact form comes in, it's not coming to us as developers. It's going to whoever the client is. But that to address can be whoever you want. The subject is going to be new contact form submitted. And then we've got to generate out the text for the email. So we're going to say the name is going to come from the rec.body.name. You know what, let's do this as HTML and throw in a line break here. And then we can say the person's email address is going to come from the rec.body.email. And finally, the message is going to come from the rec.body.message. Now that we've done all of that, we need to do the last final part, which is just going to say, hey, await sgmail, fire off the message that I just created right here. I save all of that. I go back to my steps and make sure I've completed everything that I wanted to. So back end, we don't know if it's sending the email. I shouldn't check that off yet. We need to test it. So I'm going to go back to my front end. I am going to say my first API email. I'm going to hit the send button. I go back over to my back end and I don't have any error messages. That's a good sign. So I am going to go to my phone and see my email came through on my phone. Questions about that before we wrap it up?
Is the HTML property a set property of SendGrid?
It is. Emails can either be HTML or text message. It is a good idea, or text only, I should say, not SMS, but text only. It is a good idea to set both of them in case anyone is on an archaic email client that does not support HTML. That's why they support both of them, because email itself natively can be text only or HTML. But in a pinch, when you know the person getting the email will have an HTML client, you can just set it as HTML. But yes, text and HTML are two defined properties that SendGrid is expecting. Just like two from all of those as well, subject. Everyone good? Anyone have questions? Remember that the rec body name, email, and message are all lining up with our body name, email, message that we're pulling in from our front end right here. Flush.
I didn't understand the part like where the from field is going to be from an authenticated domain? Like, does that mean if I have like a very customized email, I won't be able to send it to you?
No, what we're basically saying is when you go to, of course I don't have it open. When you go through the setup of authenticating your domain here, when you set up all the CNAME, whatever the end of the domain name is here at this Zane.tech, you have to make sure that that lines up here with the Zane.tech. So you can add, when you authenticate your domain, you can type in whatever your domain name is right here. So it could be mysupercustomdomain.com. Basically, once you hit next, it's going to say, hey, you need to take these 3 to 5 CNAME records, go to your domain and add in these CNAME records. Once SendGrid can see those CNAME records, they know that you must own that domain. You have authenticated that domain, and therefore you are now allowed to send from it.
Gotcha. I understand. I think I was mistaken. Fills up a form and adds their email in there. You receive that email from the email address that they entered.
Correct. This is what it's coming from. This is what it's going to. So here I could add maxm@hackupstate.com. And even though I don't have permission or access to the HackUpstate domain name, I can still send an email to it. What I need to authenticate is, hey, I'm allowed to send from Zane.tech.
Gotcha. Can you show us an example of that? Like, they kind of like, I'm not getting it.
So the from address, think about this as like, you aren't, right now, I could say, hey, I'm, well, now, if I sent this email, I would get that email address and be like, wait, Palash is emailing me. How is Palash emailing me? SendGrid doesn't want to allow this to happen. SendGrid doesn't want you to be allowed to send emails from a domain that you haven't authenticated. For that reason, if I sent this right now to maxm@hackupstate.com with this fake email in here, it would go immediately to my spam filter because it's saying, well, this looks like a fake sender. So what we have to do instead is say, hey, when we send an email from someone, we have to send it from a domain name that we've gone through the authentication steps. The authentication steps are what is linking the CNAME from SendGrid to the domain name that we have access to. So we can change this to whatever we want. But when we send it, we have to make sure we're sending it from a domain that we have authenticated.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you.
So
Other
Max,
questions? Yeah.
could you include in the form a to field that they could type in who they want the
You
email?
could, but you want to be careful with that because now all of a sudden you have given anyone who has access to your site permission to send emails to whoever you would like. So you could do that, but you want to be careful about that because you are basically creating an email client that anyone can send email on your behalf. And there are ways to integrate things like reCAPTCHA, the whole prove that you're not a bot, click on the traffic lights or slide the puzzle piece in, or what are these 2 numbers adding up to? Those are all very common things to see. But when you are controlling the 2 email address on your backend, no one can hijack that. No one can now send emails to someone else through your website because you're kind of locking it down and saying these emails only go to one person, which is generally a good idea. Unless you are having something like a user table and want to send out notifications like, hey, this person commented on this other user's post, you could definitely set that up. You just want to make sure that you're being smart about it and not allowing an end user to just type in an email address and send things on your behalf. Okay, last thing I want to finish up, and then you guys can ask questions about any of the code. Once we get a response back, what I want to do is make this form hide. I want to make it basically say, hey, your email's been submitted. In order to do that, because it is updating the interface, we need to do that in state. So I'm going to say form submitted and set form submitted is a use state that is false, because when the page first loads, the form has not been submitted. Then once we get the response back, we are able to set form submitted to true. And finally, if the form has been submitted, return out a p tag that says your contact form has generated an email and has been sent. We come back over, we go to our form, we type in some message, I hit the send button, and just like that, the form disappears, it updates in state, and we get our little message. And I just got an alert on my watch that says the form was submitted. Was this helpful? Was this way too fast to be beneficial? Give me some live feedback on this.
So, I think that it was helpful. It wasn't too fast. It just was that, like, because I was like, coding along, but we could only get so far because we have to set up the SendGrid.
Yeah.
So after that point, it's like, it is good to know though to go ahead and rewatch the video from setting up the SendGrid to forward.
Cool. And reminder, this is not a requirement. And I don't want you to feel like I am dropping this on you and being like, oh, by the way, tomorrow I want to see all of your backend sending an email. That is definitely not the case. This is just a very common feature that you want to set up. You know, whether it's password reset or a contact form or whatever it is. So just wanted to give you a little bit of exposure to it, so that you know how to do it. Another common thing is setting up a contact form table in your database, and then being able to not only send the email, but also insert the contact form submissions into a new row in your database. That way you've got a double backup, right? So if the email system breaks for whatever reason, you still have those contact form submissions in the database that you could always go back and access. Doug, we did use a front end only site for this. It was on Caitlin's website. And we set that up in an earlier class.
Oh, was that the mail.this.2?
That was the one that shut down.
Okay.
And is still shut down. So we switched to one called FormBold. Oops, I missed an H there. FormBold is very similar to MailThis.2, maybe a little bit more robust, and does allow you to have a contact form on your website without having a backend. So if you are developing a front end website for a client, and you've done all of the work on the front end, and then they're like, oh, I want a contact form, it can be a lot to set up a whole back end and have to pay for hosting when all you want to do is send an email with a contact form submission. So that's when a service like FormBold is definitely a good option to consider. I would only go through all of the steps of setting up SendGrid and all of that if you already have a back end up and running for that project. I wouldn't go out of your way to set up a backend just for a contact form submission.
Thank
Other
you.
questions? All right. Tomorrow, expect a long lecture on adulting. If you have any suggestions, please hit up that Slack thread. And it could be something out of left field as, I don't know, how do I write a check? Or why do I need stamps? I think that's dumb. I'm hoping tomorrow will be interactive. I'm hoping you guys will have questions and interrupt me, make it as much of a conversation as possible. I am hoping that there is at least one thing that you get out of that class, something to think about. But these are all things that I've noticed over the years that I just wish I knew much earlier on in my life than I did. Doug, you are also welcome to chime in with anything that you would like to see on that list, or anything that you learned from the boot camp or from our one-on-ones that you think would be beneficial for other students. You are welcome to add that in. Otherwise, have a great night. I will see you tomorrow for the last class virtually of my teaching. Thursday is open hack in person, and then all of next week is in person with Laura. And then the final week is down at Common Space. Have a good night, everyone. I'll stick around just for a couple minutes in case anyone has last minute questions.